In October of 1994, 3 film students took a trip to Burkittsville, Maryland to film a documentary in search of the Blair Witch. They entered the woods in search of it, but after 8 days of filming, they all unexpectedly have gone missing, with nothing but their film being recovered a full year later. Now that might make some people feel a bit distraught. A missing person in any community is certainly heartbreaking to say the least. But here's the thing, the Blair Witch was never real. The film had a very unique marketing campaign for the time. They wanted to create as much uncertainty as possible when marketing the movie, so that nobody really knew whether or not the film was an actual documentary. They even made a full website with evidence from a fake police investigation and tons of behind-the-scenes information. And all of this happened when the internet was in its infancy. Nobody knew what to believe. This was the film that popularized a whole new genre of horror, the found footage genre, and 16 years later, Chris Straub would do the exact same thing, starting an entire genre of content, which is known today as analog horror. Since then, the genre has become even more popular, as series like FNAF VHS by Squimpus McGrimpus, Harmony and Horror by Baddington, and various others add onto this already gargantuan genre. But before we get to the bottom of this, we have to answer one simple question.
Hello, and welcome to the National Institute of Horror YouTube videos. Analog horror is defined by one major aspect, that being the use of primitive technology as a storytelling device. Another thing that makes analog horror work so well is...
So what separates analog horror from your regular found footage movies or scary YouTube videos? Analog horror relies on the familiarity and nostalgia people have for older forms of medium, whether it's local TV or old VHS tapes. I think there's a big reason the Backroom series by Kane Pixels works so perfectly. Of course, on top of the wonderful immersion and great editing. The biggest fear a person has in the Backrooms isn't always the monsters or even the isolation. The biggest fear is being forgotten. This is portrayed excellently by the use of VHS tapes, a form of physical media that has largely been forgotten in and of itself, only ever really being used by collectors. The VHS effect itself can also play off of nostalgia, a feeling that's widely known for being just as lonesome as it is endearing. And with the constant warping, moving, and shifting caused by the effect, you never really know if there's something staring at you from behind the screen. A lot of the horror in these videos is subtle. They tend to not rely heavily on jump scares, but instead, they choose to focus on the psychological aspect of things. The best analog horror series can keep you thinking about it even full days after watching it, and to me, no series was able to do that as well as Gemini was one of the earlier series, starting in November 2019 by Remy Abode. The series follows a collection of seemingly mundane VHS tapes by the fictional company Gemini Home Entertainment. And while the tapes don't seem to be connected by anything at first, actually watching them reveals an ongoing narrative about an alien invasion that's happening literally under our noses. The first tape is a great introduction to the series. It shows us a VHS tape about the world's weirdest animals. And yeah, I will say fake people would definitely classify as a bit unusual. An issue with some of the earlier tapes is that they really latch on to the rule of threes. Basically, the tape starts playing and everything is going fine and dandy. The first thing is normal, the second thing, normal. Then the third thing shows up and you're just like, The timing of the bait and switch is a bit less predictable in the later episodes, and they're straight up just not even in the new minisodes. And I do see a lot of other analog horror series falling into this trap as well. But the reason I can forgive Gemini for this is the thing they do best at. When it comes to visuals, they deliver, and they deliver hard. You never get a perfect view of the monsters. They're often only seen up close or as a silhouette. But getting to see the monsters shifting and contorting in front of your very eyes automatically makes this series really appealing. There's some pretty good psychological horror as well. But in my opinion, Gemini is at its scariest when it's playing off of body horror. A lot of the monsters are, as the first episode puts it, fake people. But deep root disease is probably the most terrifying concept Gemini has to offer. Yeah, even worse than being replaced by a copy. It infiltrates the body and begins to spread everywhere. There's no cure, so you're just forced to suffer as the roots overpower everything in your body. The concept on its own is terrifying, but when applied to the wonderful visual design, you could really get an idea to just how painful it is. The worst part of all of this is that you remain fully conscious and aware of what's going on. In the video Shifting Tendons, you can see the infected individual, Barry Johnson, is still able to communicate with the interviewers, even though on the outside, he's far from even resembling anything close to human. This really blurs the line between human and monster. At what point could the people with this illness no longer be considered people? When they no longer look human? They always have at least a slight resemblance to a human body, even decades after the initial infection. When they stop thinking, they don't. While deep root disease may be the most painful thing in the series, it's still not the most deadly. We can't forget about Gemini's main antagonist, the ginormous, almost Lovecraftian cosmic threat, the Iris. All things considered, nothing is really known about the Iris. The only thing we know for certain is that it's able to have complete control over the various monsters we see throughout the tapes. While in earlier episodes, the movement of the monsters is a bit jagged, in later episodes, everything looks really good. So even if you don't get scared by this type of content, you can always appreciate the designs and effects, but for me at least, I still get full-blown chills when I rewatch Gemini. Moments like fake people, nothing can live inside the Marianas Trench, Feed the Woods, Nature's Mockery, and the entirety of Sleep Image Visualizer are all great moments, and highly worth checking out. And the commitment done for this series is incredible. For the video Lethal Omen commercial, instead of just making a fake trailer and calling it a day, they actually made it into a fully playable game that you can download on itch.io. And the game has multiple endings that aren't even showcased in the video. I highly recommend checking this series out if you haven't already. And if you've already seen it, you could always use it as a great introduction to get other people into the genre. Okay, by now everyone's already heard of The Walton Files, the FNAF-inspired spooky scary horror featuring the haunting presence of Jack Walton. But for the 4 people who haven't heard of it, The Walton Files is a series of videos created by Martin Walls. They follow the fictional company Bunny Smiles Incorporated, as well as the Bons Burgers restaurant. A lot of the intrigue comes from the mysterious backstories for the characters, which, as you might expect, leads to a lot of theorizing. And when it comes to analog horror, I think that Gemini is the scariest. However, The Walton Files is easily the most disturbing. Episode 1 and 2 are both compilations of various types of tapes for the Bons Burgers brand. These can range from training tapes, to entertainment, to replays of incidents long forgotten. Twice. But one of the most important aspects of the series is the business relationship between Felix Kranken and Jack Walton. Episode 3 clocks in at nearly an hour long, and it's presented as an uncut gameplay video of an arcade game from the 70s or 80s. 58 minutes is a long time for an analog horror video, especially because most analog horror videos are between 4 and 10 minutes, but this video is completely packed to the brim with content. I highly recommend making the time to watch it all in one sitting, as it allows you to appreciate the pacing to the fullest. There's an incredible moment in episode 3. Near the very beginning of the video, Sophie misspells her name as Soapy. It doesn't come off as that big of a deal. It's used to show that the game was in such early beta that there wasn't even a way to hit backspace on the name screen. Then later on, after plenty of strange occurrences already happen, you play a game of hide and seek with Shaw. It already starts off pretty unsettlingly, as even though the game looks like it was made for kids, you could tell that if one thing went wrong, it's no longer a happy place. So you find her. And after that, it's your turn to hide. She counts down to 0 and, well, I think I'll just let you watch this.
Am I still beautiful to you, Sophie?
The way everything works here is complete perfection. Everything from the suspense of Shaw getting ever closer to you, the bizarre imagery, the line delivery, the subversion of expectations, and even the background music. Everything just works so well. Between the initial spelling mistake and the grand payoff, a full 37 minutes had gone by, and at that point the setup happened so long ago that you've most likely forgotten about the mistake earlier. But as soon as you hear the words leave her mouth, you remember everything. This is also a real turning point in the story, as after this point, the entire story just kind of unravels in front of you. Yeah, there was some exposition earlier, but here you could really see the story coming together. The thing that makes the animatronics in the Walton Files so much more human than, say, the animatronics in FNAF is the fact that they can still feel, at least to a degree. In Five Nights at Freddy's, the kids die and are stuffed in the suit, with the only thing keeping the robots alive being the possession of the suits. But in the Walton Files, the people and the characters are still living and breathing, in a constant state of numbness from their bodies getting used to the endless pain. And while FNAF keeps this information low-key, being hidden in newspapers or stylized in a way you could straight up ignore, the Walton Files gets straight in your face and shows you that, yup, they're still suffering. And even if they don't look very lively, they can still interact with Sophie directly, even if it is through a video game. Aside from the main series, there are also two non-canon but equally amazing episodes, The Mysterious House and Buzu's Ghosts. Both of them are very worth checking out, as they still have a lot of the same characters as the main cast, just a little bit different. According to a YouTube community post, Martin is apparently steering away from the analog horror genre for future installments of the Walton Files. And while I'm not sure what that might look like, I'm sure whatever's coming next will be just as good as what we've seen from the series so far. The Walton Files Season 1 is yet to conclude, with 6 planned episodes and only 3 currently released. The Mandela Catalog is the first thing an alarming number of people think when they hear the term analog horror. And the style of the series is so recognizable that I could post a picture of this, and there's a guarantee that someone would mention the Mandela Catalog. The series is incredibly hit or miss depending on who you ask, leaving some people terrified where others might think it's just bland or boring. I might have done this series a bit dirty by putting it after such universally acclaimed series like Gemini and the Walton Files. But the Mandela Catalog can still stand on its own as a fine addition to the genre. While it isn't as disturbing as the Walton Files, or as highly produced as Gemini Home Entertainment, the Mandela Catalog has a myriad of different ideas that come into play. The horror depicted in the Mandela Catalog is all psychological. You never know who around you is real and who's fake. And quotes like, can really increase paranoia, and could lead to an all-around, pretty scary experience. Like Gemini, the Mandela Catalog has an obsession with fake people. More specifically, the main antagonists of the series, alternates. Here's what we know about alternates so far. They're imperfect clones, often having warped proportions. They've been around since biblical times. They can talk and try to convince you to get close to them. They might be able to turn invisible. And they're incredibly dangerous. So much to the point where the police are actively encouraged and obligated to not help people that are being faced with an alternate. The iconic choose a real person scene is super recognizable for a reason, and the setting of a small town with a lot of missing people has a ton of potential. I love the VHS scene in Exhibition, as it's one of the very few moments in the series so far where we can actually see a camera being used in real time. In newer episodes, the series has also been implementing its own version of the bait and switch, having something initially look like a 2009 ghost sighting video, and then cut to the closet room. But I think the bait might be too good. So much to the point where I had almost disregarded it as a meme video. Well, there's my praise, time to complain. I've never really liked the animated religious scenes. That's because the source of the original footage is from a show called The Beginner's Bible, which revolves around telling stories of the Bible in animated form. So while I can see why people might be scared of this, I'm just not, because to me, it just seems like a YTP of something no one cares about.
The plagues will bring very bad.
There's probably a lot of deep lore hidden in the episodes or something, but to me, it's just an angel with googly eyes. Thankfully, in later episodes, the Mandela Catalog is delivering more on the production value, so I can hope that this series will only get better with time. Each of the series I've brought up in this video all have a similar major theme. What does it truly mean to be human? If someone turns into a monster, aren't they still at least partially human? If something can walk, talk, and comprehend just like a person can, then what makes them any less human than the rest of us? I am not a skinwalker.
I am not a skinwalker. I am not.
Analog horror is by far the scariest type of content on YouTube, and from what I've seen, nothing else can even compare. Sure, it has its tropes and cliches, just like every other source of media, but it stands out to me, and many others, as something truly special. Thanks for watching.